Hello, everybody, and welcome once again to the Soldiers of Cinema podcast. I'm Clark Coffey, and with me, as always, Mr. Cullen McFader. What's going on, buddy?
Hello. Not much. Excited to be back again.
You, as always, you sound excited, but like laid back excited.
I don't want to scare people off.
You don't want to,
jumping out their screens.
If we were both as excited as me, it would be too much. So you've got like the chill excited thing going on. Anyway, welcome once again, everybody. This is episode 10, and we will be discussing Werner Herzog's Masterclass lesson 11. Not 10, 11. I know it's kind of confusing. We're wild like that. And lesson 11 is about camera, cinematography, a.k.a. it's not the gear, it's you. Cullen, I know you're going to have a ton of stuff to say about this. I know that you know more about gear than any single person I think I know. So I'll be excited to hear some of your thoughts on a lot of these things. But yeah, right off the bat, as usual, as per Mr. Herzog, he jumps right into, making a super huge declarative statement where, hey, get over the gear. It's not about the gear. It's you. Go out there and make a freaking film with a pinhole camera. Stop worrying about the latest and greatest gear. What say you, sir?
I agree completely.
Now wait, but the question is, how many films have you made with a pinhole camera? I'd like to, and
all of them thus far. It's all I own.
And I'd like to know, how long did it take you to shoot
stop motion,
frame by frame?
No, I think that he's completely right. Like as you know, I like gear. I like to, play with cameras. I like lenses and things like that. But
for sure.
And I'm a big proponent of owning all of that. Like, I don't like to rent major equipment. I like to, buy and have it be my own. However, with that being said, I don't think I've ever bought a new camera until the one that I currently have has kind of reached a threshold or a ceiling of what I can do with it.
Yeah.
So, for example, I'm doing a feature right now. I don't think with the last camera that I have, I've got the Blackmagic Ursa G2.
Nice
the camera I had before this. I don't think that I would be nearly as confident to use for a feature film as I do right now with this camera. And so that's kind of where I'm going. Like, the first camera I ever had was an old, high 8 tape camera. And I had that for years. And then I had a handy cam, one of those little camcorders for years. And then I had a Sony mirrorless camera for years. And it was, again, every time I upgraded, it was due to the point that I felt like I had both learned all I could on that camera and that I'd reach a certain point where it was stagnating what I could do with my movies.
I'm curious. Do you have any kind of examples that you might share? There might be some filmmakers out there who, they're just getting into filmmaking and they're trying to figure out, should I upgrade? Or maybe even they're trying to figure out what should I get? I mean, do you have any kind of examples, the stories you can kind of share where you did realize, oh, okay, it's by necessity that I need to go out and upgrade my gear, as opposed to, just kind of wanting it and needing it and kind of buying into the whole latest, greatest, you get the B&H catalog in the mail and you're like drooling over everything just because it's so because it's so amazing. But I'm just curious kind of what if any particular cues you might have had during that process.
A lot of it is about ergonomics for me. It's, of course, I think that's the thing about the expense of film equipment, is so often that cheaper film equipment may actually be equal quality wise in terms of the output quality to really expensive equipment. The expensive equipment is usually expensive because it is easier to use, more reliable, a lot more, hardy, and will survive for longer. And lighting is a huge example of that, where you can get cheap lights that, put out just as much light and, have just as great of a quality of light as, really expensive lights. But
you breathe on them, and they're gone.
So an example of that would be with the old Blackmagic that I had was not great in low light.
Now, what did you have? Did you have the 4K?
Yeah, I had the production camera 4K.
Okay.
So it was the big, kind of, not big,
the big box.
The box one, yeah. It looks like a silver blob box. And that was not good in low light. It had a lot of fixed pattern noise issues. And it was kind of while I was shooting that Western that we've talked about on here before.
Right.
And we had a night scene, and it was not even nighttime. It was pretty much dusk, really early dusk, and I couldn't see anything. And I wound up in post having to just pile a bunch of film grain on it because it was like so noisy. And that camera just was really limited in that, it only went up to 30 frames per second.
Yeah.
It's the ISO. You only had 3 options for ISO: 200, 400, or 800. So you couldn't even fine tune things like that. And I just got to a point where I was like, I have the money right now to make an upgrade. I might as well just make my life easier. But yeah, I totally agree that it was never about, and there's a lot, speaking about cheap equipment, there's a lot of equipment that I have that is very cheap that I'm not out there looking for, as you said, looking through the B&H catalog where I'm like, oh, what's the latest, thing that Aperture Lights have put out, or what's the newest gimbal or things like that. Like I don't really, I don't like gimbals. I don't like things like that. It's usually a gear upgrade for me is usually something that is just for the sake of efficiency and for making my life easier, and not for the sake of like, oh man, I want that camera because it's
and hopefully propelled
4K
by
or 8K
story,
or whatever.
right?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly,
ideally,
yeah.
it's propelled by story. I mean, you've got whatever stories you're working to tell. The limitations of your current gear are providing a very real obstacle, and that it's the story is pushing the gear.
And I would have bought the Ursa G2 if it was a 1080 camera. Like I don't care about 4K, I don't care about 8K, 12K, whatever. That doesn't, that's such a big thing.
Oh
right
wow!
now
I mean, do you want to talk about that just a little bit? I don't want to get too off track, but let's touch base on this. Because that is right. I mean, a big part of this is marketing, right? We're all kind of exposed to just this onslaught of marketing messaging about the latest and greatest, right? And I mean, a big way, that these camera companies continue to sell newer models is, it's like the resolution war.
It's got a bigger number on it.
Is a big part of it. Tell me a little bit about that. I mean,
it's funny. I wrote I think it was like a 30-page paper on this when I was at university.
Well, let's really dive in there.
Yeah, I can read my whole paper on the problem. No, but I mean, essentially, image quality does not come down to the amount of pixels that you have in it, unless there's something that a term called actual fidelity or something like that. I can't remember what the exact term is, but essentially what that means is that there's a certain point where the human eye no longer distinguishes.
It's like a law of diminishing returns, right? Yeah. In a sense, right? Yeah.
Even at the point where you can see, even like there's no camera, even at 720p, where you could individually count pixels.
Yeah.
What matters more is the quality of sensor in terms of the color, the intake of the color. But those are things that are dynamic range. Exactly. Those are things that are more difficult to market, though, because they require a more technical understanding of how cameras work. Whereas
much more nuanced, right?
Yeah,
and the messaging for that is so much harder to communicate. It's easy to just say
saying that like 12K,
right?
It's got more pixels, and it's everyone understands what high definition means.
It's like when we were kids, well, at least when I was kids, and like it would be like Nintendo 8-bit, and then Sega comes out 16-bit,
and 32. Yeah,
it's kind of what it reminds me of when I was a kid.
Yeah, and
right?
It's exactly like that, where it's like, is the quality of the game, and that's what I always tell people too, is that and I made tons of movies on a shitty little high 8 video camera that you had to record onto tape and then transfer that tape, and it was never the quality of the camera that made those good, because the quality of the camera, if anything, was a detriment to them, but they were good in spite of the quality of the camera.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the idea that Herzog's getting at with the pinhole camera thing, which is really, really something that I try to drill in when I teach, or when a student of mine asks me, and most of my students are either early high school or late middle school. So really just kind of getting into that level where you would start buying your own cameras and things like that. Well, and I always say that exact thing. It's like, get something that is cheap, that takes video.
And I want to add too, I think, I never want to try to put words in Herzog's mouth or anything, but I, just kind of speaking from, a completely different art form as well. I remember when I was a kid and I first started playing guitar, and I was getting, I had an instructor, and I was like looking finally to get a guitar, of course, and what I wanted, right, was like Eddie Van Halen, rest in peace, You know, like electric guitar. You know, I wanted like huge Marshall amp, and I wanted all this stuff, right? And I'm like, give me a bunch of pedals. And my parents were like, no, we're gonna get you a really simple acoustic guitar. And my instructor was like, yep, that's exactly what you should get him. And I was like, why? And my instructor said, look, you know, in the beginning, you've got that. It's all about mastering the fundamentals. And all this extraneous stuff, right? All these effects, the amplifier, different, you know, pickup combinations, all this kind of stuff here. You're not ready for that yet. Of course, I thought I was ready for it. And I guess, you know, sometimes I kind of feel like cameras can be that way.
Oh, absolutely.
Master the fundamentals of getting an image, of capturing an image. Just master the fundamentals.
And as we've spoken about too, you know, neither of us went to film school, but I have friends that went, and they tell stories, and I've met some of these people that they went to school with that I don't know particularly well, but I've just heard these kind of anecdotal stories about these kind of usually, you know, like a trust fund kid who gets his parents to buy him a red, and it's like, my movies still aren't good. I'm still not getting accepted to festivals. I'm still not, you know, I'm not getting good grades on my movies. And it's like you expect, and I think, again, completely in line with what you said with the guitar thing. It's like you expect getting an expensive guitar is suddenly going to make you an impressive musician.
It's just not the
case. You expect getting a red camera is going to suddenly make, you know, there are movies that are shot on reds, on Aries, on film that I think look like garbage.
And even more, they're just not good stories. They're just not great films, right?
You know, and you know, even just, but specifically for like the cinematography,
right?
Like there are movies that are shot on very expensive equipment, very expensive gear, high octane Hollywood movies that I do think genuinely look worse than some movies that were shot on iPhones or shot on on, you know, just a like a Canon Rebel.
Yeah. And this should be an empowering thing. I mean, I hope for you guys out there listening, I mean, this should be an empowering idea. You don't have to wait to have a bunch of money or to have access to, you know, an extraordinarily expensive camera. You know, we'll keep reiterating this over and over and over, but shoot with what you have. And don't look at the camera that you have as some kind of limitation. You know, a lot of time, and as with all kinds of, you know, as with so many different aspects of making art, your limitations can actually be a great strength. They can help kind of provide a, you know, in a strange way, like a scaffolding that can actually help you build your work. So having a simple camera is like, don't ever think that should keep you from making your film. It really, really shouldn't.
And it's sort of, I mean, it also can sort of seem paradoxical for me because, of course, I do have quite an expensive camera. I've got a lot of lenses and things like that. But I think the idea for me is, even if those were stolen, or even if I was driving and they fell out of my car and all broke, the first thing I would do is go and get a $300 shitty little DSLR and start using that to make movies. I wouldn't just sit there and sulk and go, my movies are ruined because I lost the big camera. I can't make movies
So
anymore.
What you're saying is that if all of your gear somehow happened to magically disappear, you'd be okay? What was your address again, Colin? I forget.
Well, luckily the border's closed right now. So.
Oh, gosh, you're right. Darn it. Well, poo.
But no, I mean, I think that kind of sums it up. I think we're in agreement with Herzog on that.
Yeah.
But it's like, you know, I don't think he's expecting many first-time filmmakers to actually go out with a pinhole camera and make a movie with that. Although pinhole cameras can be very fun to take pictures with.
Yeah.
But I think his idea is just, again, that if you couldn't tell a story in a single photograph with a pinhole camera, then how are you going to tell a story with a, you know, $15,000 Red or Sony or Blackmagic camera? Like, you can't. You know, you gotta master the fundamentals of visual storytelling prior to any of that.
Absolutely. And it's funny, you know, speaking of mastering the fundamentals, now this is kind of funny to me. And Herzog certainly communicates this with all sincerity. I'd like to get your views on this. But Herzog talks about, and you can maybe tell what I think because I'm laughing here as I say it, he talks about not even allowing his DPs to use a viewfinder.
Yeah,
I would love to be on the set. Now, with all due respect, I have a sneaky suspicion that his DPs generally use viewfinders and his operators use viewfinders, but I think, again, this is kind of his way of of just really trying to drive home the point.
Exaggerating,
I think hey, maybe I've got it all backwards. I mean, maybe maybe not. I'd love to see somebody shoot without a viewfinder. I've never seen it done personally myself, and I would consider that quite an extraordinary feat to shoot an entire film without using one. But I assume you probably agree that you think maybe it's just a little bit hyperbolic, just a hair.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think I understand what he means again too, with the idea of as a DP or as a camera operator, you should probably know at a certain focal length what's in the frame.
Oh, for no
and
question,
you should be able to. Yeah, but I think that. And perhaps this is his way of really stressing that.
And I'm sure people can get close, right? I mean, I'm sure you use the same camera and lenses for a long period of time. I'm sure that your approximation can be extremely close. I mean, So let me rewind that a little bit. I'm not saying that this is so far fetched and ridiculous that a really talented, skilled DP couldn't estimate within extremely close
or
tolerances what the frame.
Yeah.
Right, absolutely. And I mean, if you use the same gear for a long enough time, your muscle memory, I mean, I've seen some extraordinary, almost seemed like magical focus pulling and,
old Hollywood
operation.
Focus pullers didn't have viewfinders. They had to know the foot.
You have to know that, right? You'd actually measure it out. You'd have to know what that depth of focus was going to be and stay within that. Absolutely. So, it's not like I'm laughing like, oh, this is impossible. I personally think that there's nothing wrong with using a viewfinder, and it would, but I do think his overall general point about really kind of becoming as much one with your gear as possible to the point where you can estimate that frame and the depth of focus very closely, and you can understand the differences in lenses and things like this. But anyway, it's just funny. Of course, Herzog, like always, has a wonderful way of driving his points home.
Then I think the fundamentals of what a lot of Herzog talks about in this whole masterclass, and what a very common tenet of teaching, whether it's film or anything, is you have to essentially understand the rules to break them. So understand your camera in and out to the point where you don't need a viewfinder. Before you then rely on a viewfinder, I think is kind of
good way to put it.
Idea. And so, and that's the same reason that when I am teaching any focus pulling in the film classes I do, I don't let them use focus peaking. I say focus without focus. You can use it once you know how to focus.
Yeah,
but
don't it be a crutch.
Rely on focus peaking. So I turn it off and I make them, pull focus just by doing that, or storyboarding. I say, don't take out the camera and see what focal length you need. Make a guess, make an observation, and try and if you're wrong, that's fine, because that's the best way to learn. But give yourself the chance, and if anything, put yourself in a position that causes you to fail, because then
I'll tell you,
very likely.
And I tell you that it really does have and this. So sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. I just had this done. It's so important. You might wonder, well, why? Okay, look, if I have focus peaking, if I have all these tools available to me, I have these extraordinarily wonderful viewfinders, or electronic viewfinders with all different types of histograms, peaking, and everything. Like, why should I need to learn how to do so many of these things manually? Well, I'll tell you, it's like GPS today. It's like, and I am such a sucker for this. I have completely fallen into this. But when I first started driving, of course, we didn't have GPS. Nobody had smartphones. I had a map, or I just had to remember where things were. And I got around all over the place.
We've both been pizza delivery drivers. So
and I was a pizza delivery guy, and I used to string together 4, 5, 6 pizza deliveries, and I would just look at a map for about a minute and a half, and I would map out every single delivery in order, and I would go. And that was it.
Yeah, they didn't allow us to use our phones.
And I'm telling you, I could not find my way to the grocery store that I go to 50 times a month today, because I have become so reliant on my cell phone, on my GPS. And there will definitely come a time when you're shooting where you're going to be on location, and one of those tools that you've learned to rely on is going to fail, or won't work in the specific circumstance that you're going to need it to be
or you'll be shooting on a medium that doesn't allow it.
Any number of these things, correct. Any number or combination of these things. And what are you going to do then? And so and you think, well, what's the chances of that happening? Well, I think even with the best gear, the chances are actually not that far fetched.
No, and I think even taking it a step further there too, I've seen people who have no equipment failure, have focus peaking on, learn to focus pull with focus peaking, who are awful at it, even with focus peaking, who
Yeah,
their idea of focus is getting the most colored squares in the spot and not actually really analyzing the image for what it is of what's in focus and what's
Excellent
not.
point. Right.
And it's like
they're not even looking at the image.
It makes
I've
your
seen
brain
this too.
turn into like an autofocus thing, which is
Yeah.
the worst.
Yeah, so great points. And so I think we just, hammer home yet again the importance of really learning the fundamentals and then building upon that. Learn to navigate manually, and then you're not having to rely on the tools to the point where you're kind of pushed out of the equation. It's like at that point, what are you there for then?
Yeah.
So, he mentions, and I've seen this film briefly, or not briefly, it's a brief film, so I've just seen it. And you've not yet, but Herzog talks about the documentary film, and I think it's the English title is The Mad Masters, which is a 1955 short documentary. It's about 36 seconds long-ish, shot in the Gold Coast, and has to do with colonialism and its impact on the people there. And not that I would pretend to understand complete context of this film, because it would take a little bit more than just watching the film to obtain a complete context. But it's really an extraordinarily intimate view on an important religious ritual that's taking place that the filmmaker has actually been invited to document. And Herzog uses an example of, what you can do with such minimal gear. And I think Herzog mentions, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like he has a hand cranked camera. He can only shoot, 24-second burst. He's got one lens. I do not remember the focal length of the lens that he had available to him. But I mean, really rudimentary gear. And I think it was just him. And I'm curious, I don't even know if sound was even recorded for this. I'm not quite sure if any of the sound is actually, on location sound there. I'm not quite sure, but the bottom line is that it's really an extraordinary film. It documents something really interesting and visceral. And here's a guy with a camera that to most people today they'd be like, what the hell is this? You know? So
I do want to ask you a few questions too.
Yeah, shoot.
Relating to this and relating again to that idea, not just to talk about gear, but to talk about how gear can affect your movie.
Yeah.
So firstly, and we briefly touched on this before, I think, in another episode, but I don't think either of us have ever shot a full feature or even a longer short of our own on film.
That's correct. I have not.
I've shot. I have, as I said, I have a 16mm camera, and I've shot short things that, again, very similar to what you just described, where it's a hand cranked, push button thing that goes for 24 seconds. And I think, just to get into a broader scope of it, because you also mentioned the idea that he has not a zoom lens, just a lens with a single focal length.
That's my understanding, that he's just got a single focal length lens. That's correct.
Yeah,
but I don't recall what.
And going beyond what maybe this movie, the limitations on this movie were, but just to a general scope of film altogether as well. The weight of cameras has gone down so much.
Yes.
And I find, not just in terms of just the ease on the camera operator or whatever carrying it, I find that all of those things, restrictions are some of the best things for story ever.
I agree.
It's another one of the reasons that I really wanted to get an upgraded camera was because I like larger cameras, because I like the feeling of, and I've always described it this way, is that
a heavy camera.
Let's say that I'm trying to shoot a scene and I need the camera to be in a corner, and I need to be high up in a corner looking down at somebody, and the camera's too big for that. It just won't work. I find that the second decision that I have to make there, going, okay, that's not going to work. Now I have to actually think about the shot and go, what is the exact placement? Or if I'm shooting on a lens that, say I'm shooting on a 50 and I don't have any other lenses with me, the idea of being restricted by that lens and going, all right, I can't get closer to that. So now I have to really think about what story can I tell with this shot with these limited circumstances that I've got. I think that makes you think way harder about what you're actually doing and the placement of the camera and what you're, the visual storytelling of the movie.
I would agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
I think that there is a strange kind of paradox, kind of this weird paradox that goes on with the creative process where, and I think I guess by its very nature, right, any medium is a set of limitations, right?
Yes, yeah.
If you're a sculptor, there's a certain set of limitations, and then even further, depending on the material that you're sculpting in, right? If you're a painter, that's a certain set of restrictions that are different than if you were a sculptor, and then even further, what are you painting on? What are you painting with? If you're a filmmaker, what you're shooting with, camera-wise, medium-wise, lens-wise, etc. I mean, so, kind of by its very definition, right, all mediums are these set of limitations. You can look at them that way. And so, I mean, basically what we're doing when we sit down and we say we want to create something and then we pick some way to express ourselves, we're saying, what set of limitations would I like? To work with.
What are my options here? Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of what you're doing.
Well, it's also one of the reasons that I prefer, if I can avoid handheld, I prefer to shoot on tripod all the time for movies that I'm making, because I find again that when you're shooting handheld and you're kind of, there are some great handheld shots and movies that use handheld extremely well, but they're all almost to me planned like they're tripods. Whereas I find a lot of people fall into, when they're just doing handheld photography, just kind of going with the flow and almost improvising the camera. Whereas I find if I'm on a tripod, I really have to know where everything's going to be, because I have to make sure that, if I'm still here, I have to make sure that I can get all the stuff in the shot and really plan that out. That's not to say there aren't places for handheld, and I use handheld when it's appropriate, but I do think that, and same again goes for these cameras that can go up to like 300,000 ISO or 256,000 ISO or whatever, and it's like you're basically throwing lighting out the window because you don't need to light anymore. I think that oftentimes the breaking down of those limitations ironically leads to almost not necessarily a laziness, but just an overlooking of certain decisions that should still be really vital.
It might be less premeditated. It's true. It's possible. I mean, I think, and we can, to tie this in a little bit, Herzog, let's talk about operating camera and a larger camera, a smaller camera. And there's no question these things have a significant impact on your filmmaking, and you can certainly see this over time. I think you and I have talked about this, where cameras used to weigh, a couple 100 pounds, and you look at how a film was shot, and then fast forward to today, where people are shooting with mirrorless, just minuscule form factor cameras that weigh ounces. You can see just a profound difference in how most films look today, just based on that one change in technology, just that one alone. But I mean, Herzog talks about operating with his whole body, and I especially be curious what you think about this. I am like you. I like a full, more kind of formal, traditional form factor camera, video. I'm not a big fan of small form factor, and I think if I was understanding you correctly, that's one of the reasons you wanted to move to the Mini Ursa G2, correct?
Yeah, because it's a much larger.
It's a much larger.
It's not very mini, despite the name.
No, right. It's pretty substantial, and it's certainly more substantial than that production camera you had, which is still, which even that is a substantial. It's a very bulky, substantial camera compared to what a lot of people shoot with, like a Sony, or Nikon has some, or these mirrorless cameras, which have some very interesting capabilities in an extremely small form factor body. But Herzog talks about operating with his whole body, and kind of, and I love this because Herzog talks about this in so many ways over and over and over again, the physicality, the athleticism of filmmaking. And it's interesting to me to watch Herzog kind of describe this in the Masterclass, and he kind of gets up and pantomimes having a camera, but he talks about how it's a dance, that you don't want to remove yourself from the physicality of what's going on, and that this helps you kind of I think become one with the story you're telling, and it allows like a certain flow and lyricism and rhythm to kind of develop. And I'm so curious. I mean, we're talking about different technologies, different form factor cameras. What are your experiences? How do you like to shoot? What do you think about what Herzog says about, how he likes to shoot
I think
from a physical perspective?
it almost lines up exactly, because I think that larger cameras are easier to feel that weight and to feel that, exactly, like be one with the camera, and how he sort of says it, like move it with your whole body. And I
Well,
almost
it
find
certainly
that
forces it, right?
you're
I mean,
exactly when
it
you when you've got a
forces you,
huge
yeah.
camera on your shoulder, or if it's you're doing it in like an underslung or
Yeah.
whatever. I think a good camera operator is somebody who, you'll watch them contort. And I had a little bit of experience with that when I was doing live camera photography or cinematography at TIFF, which is very different than, of course, narrative, but just contorting your body to get into that image, and it can be super uncomfortable, and that's why most camera operators have really bad backs. But it feels like there's just something, again, about the image versus just having a DSLR in my hand and being able to kind of hold my hand out and point it, even beyond just the fact that smaller cameras tend to handle shakiness less well.
Yes.
There's just something about being able to just do that and to hold my camera out and be fine with it, and it's not, versus really, really feeling the weight. And you look at someone like Hoyte van Hoytema, who is he's done most of Nolan's most recent movies on IMAX, and like he really pioneered this idea of doing handheld IMAX, which is insane because IMAX cameras are like the size of desks, but he's really, really pioneered this idea of it. And it's really interesting, and it's one of these things, again, that I really talk about in the class. Is I take a look at photography, handheld photography on smaller cameras, and then something like an IMAX camera, and it's a completely different feeling. The IMAX camera almost feels like it's moving by itself, like it's this big, like every single movement of the camera is intentional, and it's precise, and it's planned, and it's versus just being able to
conscious purpose
flip a camera around. Yeah, exactly.
Right. And as I try to find, because it might be challenging for maybe somebody to kind of understand, well, what's the big deal here? It's like, don't you want the camera to be more mobile? Don't you want,
or
like,
the freedom to
and certainly, like, make no mistake, there are some definite pros to smaller cameras. Like, I mean, absolutely there are. I mean, just, but I think what we're trying to kind of highlight is like some of the things that you might not instantly think of that are benefits of a larger camera. But regardless, I think whether you're working with a larger format camera or a form factor, not format, that would be a different thing, but a larger, form factor, that's a whole different thing. Form factor camera or a small one. I mean, even with a smaller camera, you can set things up. You can put yourself in a position where you are making conscious, deliberate, purposeful movements with your entire body. And I think it really is about, I mean, and this goes back to what we've talked about directing right at the action, about not being in a video village where you're right there with the action. You are involved and present with the performers, with your actors, and it's that dance or that exchange of energy and being there.
And that's that's a really great time to actually bring up Herzog's philosophy on zooms, which is ironic because Aguirre begins with a zoom. But I think that Herzog, for those of you who haven't seen the Masterclass or don't know, that Herzog doesn't like zooms, or at least in this lesson kind of speaks to them about don't zoom into a subject, kind of actually physically move in with the camera with your whole body.
Right. So he's not saying, and we can touch on this. This is kind of two different things. He's not saying I don't ever use a zoom lens. He actually does specifically call out, and I love zooms for documentary work. Yeah. I actually love them, and I don't know that I've ever. I mean, I almost exclusively shoot documentary stuff with a zoom. Because it allows you to change the focal length of your lens on the fly, which is vital when you can't plan anything. You're running and gunning, and I think for running and gunning, zoom lens is extraordinary. Now there are trade-offs, and maybe you can explain those to people. But just your f-stop, just having less light come in, could be one of them. Yeah. Image quality would be another potentially. But what Herzog's talking about is actually making a zoom move, actually changing the focal length of the lens while you're shooting and using that footage in your film. That's what he's talking about. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, are you as hardcore against using zooms in that way?
No, I do. I like zooms.
Yeah.
I actually really enjoy. I think it's a completely different effect. I think is the
Yeah.
thing for me is that a zoom to me is like intentionally observational. It feels like you're almost prying in.
Yeah.
Whereas moving in to me feels more of an intentional movement or a deliberate like grand motion that is now even just to me it's a completely different emotion.
It is. I mean, I think, yeah, when you see a zoom, and I'm trying to think of a documentary film that I can't think of one off the top of my head where I've seen a zoom used in the actual film. I can certainly think of some narrative films where I've seen zooms.
Sergio Leone loves them.
And Quentin Tarantino, of course, even more recently uses zooms. And I feel like there's certainly a self-referential feel to them. There's a certain, it's calling attention to the artifice of the camera. I think when you're using a zoom like that. And so if you want to say, like, when Quentin Tarantino, he's postmodern, kind of really self-referential and is always referring to even his own films or other films or television shows. I mean, it's almost kind of, just one more way that he's, winking to everybody, ha ha ha, this is a film, which certainly may not be what you want to do all the time in other films. And so, yeah, I think there's a place for it.
But I think they're great for emphasis too. Like you look at The Shining, there's tons
Refresh
of
my
crash
memory.
zooms
Refresh my memory. Where do they? I haven't seen it in a long time.
The first time that Danny sees the twins and it zooms right in on his face, and it's like this great, again, this really visceral.
Is it like a dolly
feeling.
zoom though, or is it actual?
No, it's it is like a split-second crash zoom, like, and it goes from like, and he uses them in Barry Lyndon as well.
Yeah,
there's those really, really long, like some of the longest.
Like really slow, drawn out. I haven't seen either one of those films in a long time.
So yeah, I mean, I think that again, it's like
place.
any camera movement. There's if you're using the tool to convey a feeling or to
on purpose
explain a story, then that's I think what it's there for. And I
what
do
you
think
think
again
about for documentaries? Like I said, I'm still racking my brain. I can't think of a significant documentary film that I have seen that utilized a zoom move in the footage. Can you?
Beyond utilizing zooms to like recalibrate and reframe.
It kind of is a stylist. I mean, I've seen kind of like maybe Errol Morris, in a seated interview, kind of use a reframing, and kind of give it this.
Like like this feeling of dirty, very
But aside from that, I really I can't recall.
Yeah. But I mean, anyway. Again, it is funny to me because that opening shot of Aguirre is, I'm pretty sure, starts zoomed in on somebody.
There's
and
no
then
question. There's no question.
Out,
it does. There absolutely it does. And this is what's great. It's like Herzog. He contradicts himself at every turn, which is wonderful. I love it.
But no, I mean, and just to answer your question there earlier too, it is zooms these days are actually quite. They're getting to the point where they're almost matched up with primes, which is great, and they're lowering in prices. But yeah, like a cinema zoom, you're always going to have at an equivalent focal length for the price that you pay. You're always going to have a
higher f-stop limitation.
It's just less light and
or T. If we're talking cine lenses,
and and again, cinema zooms are majorly expensive. There's one that I'm looking at picking up that's actually probably the cheapest by like $10,000. For the quality of it, and that's more for me again for efficiency, is just that rather than sitting there and having to switch out a lens on set when I've got such a small crew working with me and when we've got very limited time, I'd much rather just be able to if I'm going from a
just
20
adjust
to a 50,
your boom. And of course you've got a lot more flexibility. You've got basically a nearly it's an analog infinite focal length increment between whatever the limitations of that particular lens are. So, and I think, again, I'll just reiterate, I think for run and gun, I think for documentary filmmaking, they're extraordinarily powerful. You don't always have a chance to change lenses. Matter of fact, you often don't have time to do that kind of thing. And being able to recompose your picture on the fly, your image on the fly can just be extraordinarily powerful.
Again, it goes basically with the theme of this whole episode is about, which is just know why you're doing it and understand why you're doing it and doing it with intention. Don't just do it because it's like, oh, you know what, I'm just going to zoom in here because I've got the zoom lens on. Make sure that the point of your focal length is to tell the story to its best capacity. Not to just be like, well, I'm going to get, and again, this kind of went on with our last episode too, where it's like, don't just get the options so that you can delay making that decision. And then later on in post go, oh, actually, I like that one more because that one was there. Make those decisions on set. The zoom lens should be a tool to make things more efficient for you and to give you an easier time doing that. But it shouldn't be the decision maker.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't rely on it to do so.
Well, speaking of making decisions, let's talk about what makes a great or good cinematographer. And let's start first with, as a director, if you're hiring or looking to work with a DP or cinematographer, do you have any, what are your thoughts on how to go about doing that?
Oh, it's such a fluid role. I think that's one of the first conversations that every DP and director have is it's almost like the vice president and the president, where it's like, what are you going to take care of? What am I going to take care of? What are we going to work on together?
Yeah.
Every director likes it differently, but I'd say that, again, a cinematographer is in so many ways not only a technical role, it is a support position, a creative support position for the director.
Yes.
In that the director should be able to say, I want this for the DP, and the DP, a good DP, will understand what that vision is. Famously, Steven Spielberg and Janusz Kaminski don't even meet before movies now, because Spielberg trusts Kaminski so much that he'll fulfill his vision, and
That's
Kaminski
wild,
clearly
huh?
understands, what Spielberg would go for a certain shot. And I think that's, to me, what makes a really good DP. And I think, again, it's difficult to narrow down because it's such a fluid role. There's no role of a DP that would work on one movie and work to a next movie and be doing exactly the identical things. I think what might be easier is what makes a bad DP, which to me would be very much overstepping your bounds and trying to break the hierarchy. And I think that things like that are really what makes things not conducive to a creative environment on set. Robert Elswit, and who I actually think is quite a good DP, and Paul Thomas Anderson famously no longer work together, despite the fact that they made, tons of brilliant looking movies together.
Right.
And it was because I think they just didn't get along personality wise.
And I think, and it kind of seems like common sense or obvious, but it's so vital, right?
Yeah.
You can have an extraordinary, let's say you're a director and you're looking to collaborate with a DP. Obviously this is first and foremost. It's, not only do they're able to receive your vision, they understand it, they can get on the same page with you, but that they can, I guess, add to that, or even, without taking away from or adding to it in a way that changes that vision, execute that vision, technically. Because,
and if I can give some advice to lower budget
please.
filmmakers too, who might be starting out, a few things. If you're looking for a DP, just note that, especially if you're younger, every single person that goes out and buys themselves a camera package is going to start calling themselves a DP. Coming out of film school or whatever, they're going to say that they're a DP. And I would also say, look beyond, you'll get reels if you put up, there's tons of Facebook groups that are like, find me a cinematographer, blah, blah, blah. And you can kind of post in those groups and say, hey, I need a DP for this project for this date. And so you'll get a bunch of people commenting on it with their reels and things like that.
Right.
Look beyond those, I would definitely say, because being a DP is so much more than just selecting a good set of lenses and, putting some lights up. Things can look very, very pretty, but I think that so often cinematographers use movies, especially very amateur cinematographers, use movies as just options and opportunities for them to get stuff for their demo reel. So their whole goal is to make the most brilliant, pretty looking, done up, high octane, high concept looking lighting scenarios so that they can go look at this great lighting setup. Whereas what I look for, or at least what I'm impressed by whether it's amateur or, very professional high level DPs is restraint, really, is simplicity. And I always think that somebody who can shoot an entire scene with a window and a bounce, to me, is going to be a far better and far more flexible and helpful and creative DP than somebody who just knows, the latest 10 ARRI lights that they can rent for a few thousand for a week and then
Right.
set those up. Like it's very similar to kind of, again, the rest we've been talking about. It's like, if you can't take a bounce sheet and put it up with just natural light in the room and make that look good, then there's no way that just putting up a bunch of, LED light panels and shining them at some scantily clad model is going to make you a DP. Can you tell that I have a lot of experience?
No,
with
I've seen it.
amateur?
I know exactly. I do know exactly what you're talking about, and I think it's a great point. I mean, look for people who can do a lot with very little,
and be so careful with it too. Be
Yeah.
very, very careful with choosing your DP, because
certainly meet. I
Yeah.
would absolutely say meet with people, and I've even gone so far as, of course, like meet with them, but I've even gone so far as to, do a little bit of work, just reviewing shot list and kind of having them kind of
like that,
camera test, and especially depending on the scope of your project, the budget of your project, and everything, of course. But yeah, I mean, of course, you really can't put enough time and energy into it. And I think some of the things that Herzog talks about specifically in this lesson are, he talks about, I think the ability of a cinematographer to notice nuance and subtlety, and again, to be so present there in the moment. And I think he uses a specific example of this cinematographer noticing some subtext in a documentary situation where above a table these three people were getting along and kind of kissing each other's butts and being very diplomatic politically, and this cinematographer actually noticed that below the table, literally like a literal table, that the body language of these three people was radically different, and you could actually see the unease and the resentment between these people through their body language, where they thought they weren't being seen. And he uses that as an example of this is the kind of person I want to work with, somebody who is there fully present and is extremely sensitive and observant.
Observant is the key there,
and that's really key.
And that goes for documentary and narrative.
Absolutely.
Because the best thing that you can possibly have in a DP is somebody who also recognizes actors and what their strengths are visually. And
Good
I think
point.
and to switch points to here for just a real quick second, rather than to talk to people who want to be DPs rather than people who want to be directors looking for DPs. I'd say that if I had very simple advice for somebody who wants to work as a cinematographer, it's not to go on YouTube and listen to hours of content on there about how to set up a different light to get a certain thing, or to there's some stupid videos on YouTube, like what f-stop is the best one. Which
right.
is a real video, and it's bizarre. But rather,
well, because I think
just pick up a camera and film
start
your
shooting.
family eating dinner.
Yeah,
Film
I
your
couldn't
mom
agree.
making food or something like that, and play with the light. Conrad L. Hall. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I totally agree with everything you're saying. I just wanted to add and look at great art.
Yes.
Look at art.
Paintings,
look at paintings.
photography.
Look at photography. Yeah. It's especially looking at still art, because of course it really allows you to analyze a specific frame for a long time, of course. But observe the moving picture works of masters as well. But I completely agree, and like many art forms, there are so many videos out there, and I'm sure most of them by well-intentioned people that focus on, how do I say this? Where it's almost like, here's the secret how to do this, and if you just learn this thing, then you're going to know how to do it. Like you had mentioned, it's like, well, here's like a perfect f-stop for X situation.
Well, it would be like looking at the Statue of Liberty and saying that, okay, that's a great work of art. Here's how you screw in a nail or rivet or something like that. And going like, that's this is the technique that they use to rivet together.
That's what I
Statue
mean.
of Liberty.
Like, here's the secret, right? There's so much of this. Like, here's the secret. If you want to be good at this, then here's the secret how to do it. And of course, there never are any secrets. There never are any simple answers.
You don't have to, like Conrad L. Hall, as I said, he's my favorite cinematographer of all time. I think he did some brilliant work in his. If there was ever a definition of like painting with light, he was the one.
Yeah.
And he famously usually would just use a single light source and then just bounce it around the room with mirrors or with bounces like sheets and things like that. And he was so simple in the way that he lit for story and for mood, and not just, again, for gimmick.
Flash.
I think that's a huge part of a lot of DPs that are working in bigger Hollywood movies these days as well, that go for flash, and they go for gimmick, and they go for this huge, I'm going to set up a 50 by 50 light grid that's got moving colors all over it because it's going to look really cool. And it's like, well, who cares? I don't care about that.
Yeah. But it's a good point to be careful. There's one thing I think to learn, to teach technical skill, but to think that it's the end all be all. That this light's going to make you a good cinematographer, or this, whatever these like specific, like you'd mentioned, like there's some perfect f-stop or something or whatever. It's definitely stay away from anybody that's trying to sell you some snake oil, that there's just this one way to do it, and that's the secret to do it,
And as Herzog says too, it's kind of gets into this whole aesthetic thing that he talks about, which is like, don't hunt for an aesthetic. He never hunts for an aesthetic, and I think that is a huge part of modern cinematography.
It's really great point.
You go onto Instagram, and it's like, if you look up hashtag cinematography or whatever, it's all about the aesthetic of it. It's all about, look at these neutral browns, and it's got this fall aesthetic or something like that.
Yeah.
And whereas I think it's my intention, whether I'm shooting my own thing or if I'm working on somebody else's project, is to let the subject matter dictate the cinematography.
Yeah.
Not to make the decisions, not to use it. I don't really care about color palettes. I don't care about things like that. I don't go into anything like that. I would much rather take a look at the image that we're getting on set and go, okay, how can I accentuate this? How can I take what is happening naturally, whether it be interior or exterior, and use that naturalistic element to heighten it, rather than to go in and go, in advance plan out every single little detail about where the light's going to be and what the color of that light's going to be and what the grade is going to be like afterwards, right? It's
such an interesting, kind of philosophical discussion, and it's something that I just, it's one of the many things that I just love about Herzog, that he gets me thinking about these things. But a couple things here. I mean, one, he talks about favoring momentum over style, and it's interesting that he uses the word momentum because, again, I just, he is so much about urgency. He's so much about physicality. He's so much about allowing, creating a situation where the subconscious is going to spring forth, and be careful about over analyzing and over predicting and over manipulating things. And I couldn't agree more. I mean, he talks about in that lesson about, be careful, and I've been here, I've seen this, I love DPs. I'm not one myself. I love them, but sometimes you're on set, and you've got your performers are red hot. You've got, you're trying to manage the energy and emotion of your performers, and you've got a DP who's wanting to, manipulate every single tiny.
I need to switch. That light's a little bit too hot, or whatever. It's like, yeah.
And it's like, yes, I mean, I'm like, I completely appreciate a person's dedication to doing, everything that they feel like they can do to make a film wonderful, but you've got to know as a director where to draw a line diplomatically and say, okay, hey, I appreciate what you're doing, but our focus here is the story. Our focus is the momentum of story. And like you said, it's allowing the subject to dictate, and realizing, of course, that, there's compromises between every department. And I feel like performance is such an important one. I mean, performances, we've talked about this too, is such a fragile, transient, vaporous thing. If you've got that right there, go with it. Don't stifle that by just overproducing everything to the nth.
You've really got to learn how to rein in perfectionism, and whether that's your own or whether that's somebody else on the crew or an actor or whatever.
Yeah.
You really, I'm lucky that I'm not a perfectionist, because it's definitely a personality trait that some people just have, and it's not their fault.
It's not their fault.
Oftentimes it isn't. Like, it's this compulsion, right?
Yeah.
And I'm very, very grateful that I'm not, because there are so many times where something won't be perfect, and I'll be like, no, it's good enough. I'm happy with that, and I think that we should move on for the sake of.
And it's about priority.
Momentum. I get momentum.
Yeah, it's about priority, and I think and it, like you were, just to kind of go back a little bit to what you started talking about, about this premeditated aesthetic. I think it's so interesting to me that, I mean, there's no question that Herzog has an aesthetic. I think you can see, there are so many kind of themes for sure in his films. I think like his overriding kind of philosophy or his kind of the way that he sees the world comes through so clearly.
And
in
even
so many
just
of his
visually,
films.
he really likes wide angle lenses.
And
things
visually,
like that.
he's got right. And I just love the way he ends this lesson, right? Where he's like, he talks about not being very consciously preoccupied with his aesthetic himself, and even to the point where he's telling his collaborators, his DPs, hey, I don't get artsy fartsy on me. I love that he uses that terminology.
Artsy fartsy.
I love it, but he's like, there's something so interesting and key here, I think, to the creative process as a whole, where he talks about, look, I don't premeditate this, and yet here it is. Somehow all of my films, they clearly have an aesthetic. You can't argue that they don't. But I'm not working toward that.
Yeah.
The aesthetic seeps in.
Well,
the aesthetic happens, and I just love that he's like, I don't know how that happens.
Yeah.
But what's more, I don't want to know. It's like this keeping the mystery. It's allowing, and he does this in his writing. He does this in so many aspects of his creative process where he's like, I want the mystery to be. I want there to be a subconscious, spontaneous aspect to my work. And maybe that is his aesthetic. I mean, it's like his voice, his authentic voice comes through so clearly in so many aspects of his work. And I think this is a big reason why. I think, we get so, whether we're writing or whether we're composing a shot as a DP. I mean, I think sometimes we get so analytical. We operate so much from our shoulders up that we forget that there's actually this whole body of aesthetic that lies here from your shoulders down.
Just naturally.
That you can't articulate with language or with, there's this whole subconscious ocean of aesthetic. It's inherent. It's like part of the human condition. And I think sometimes you really cut off this huge depth of aesthetic by only kind of recognizing or thinking that there's just this like shoulder up, like analytical aspect to aesthetics. So I think it's wonderful. I think it's like the way he ends this lesson's great. Yeah.
And again, it's that idea of applying each image for what it needs to be and represent, which is just, again, it hits the nail on the head. And it's exactly like you said, that we all, every single human being talks in a certain way and writes in a certain way. And I'm not consciously thinking about the style of which I string together my sentences,
because you wouldn't be able
happens.
to. That's like he uses this great analogy. It's like, look, okay, I'm writing longhand, and he jokes, he's like, oh, nobody writes longhand. You'd send a tweet now, but but it's like, look, if you were so preoccupied by your handwriting that you wouldn't be able to actually write the sentence. You
don't pay too much attention to style. You forget to write a book.
Yeah,
and book.
And I think it's such an interesting point, and it's certainly one. It speaks to me. It speaks to me deeply. It's certainly something that I need to be reminded of. I have a tendency to kind of get shoulders up, analytical, and so much of our creation really takes place in the body, in the gut, in the heart. And it's just a great reminder of that, that we are, I think, all of us, every single one of us, we're natural-born storytellers. I think we're storytelling machines, and I think all of us have a unique aesthetic that's just fundamentally, it's a part of all that we are. It's a combination of our DNA and our, the nature and nurture combination that makes us all singularly unique. And You can't just get to all of that with conscious premeditation. You just can't.
Exactly. No, it's a great way to end it, though.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, well then, on that note, everybody get out there, man, and start shooting and get to...
What are you waiting for?
What are you waiting for? That's right. With whatever camera you've got, get out there and shoot. All right, man. Well, as always, Cullen, it's been a blast. Thank you so much for being here. And for everybody out there listening, we appreciate you as well. Thank you so much for hanging in there with us. I hope it's been an enjoyable one. And until next time, we'll see you then.
See ya.